welcome back to episode 2 of Current Conditions with me, Maggie Hebman. Today, I would like to situate us a little bit deeper inside the current conditions from the perspective of both Vedic astrology and Ayurveda, which both have a lot to say about the influence of context on human health, human behavior, psychology, and emotion, both individually and collectively. So basically, we're approaching the word condition in this case in terms of the definition of a problem, like a health condition. Which, if there is a health condition, in any case, it's always important to have a proper diagnosis to understand how to proceed in terms of alleviating whatever the condition is. So I would like to diagnose the current condition, the current cultural condition, I will say, from the perspective of these Vedic sciences, which have a long-standing history of being helpful and accurate. So we'll start with the Vedic understanding of time here, which is a way of, in a very broad way, starting to get a context for what is happening now, particularly when we look at the various types of upheaval and tension and confusion and all of that. When we see it from this perspective, all of that actually makes a lot more sense. And even if that doesn't solve the problem directly, I think that is, it can be settling to understand that in some ways this was forecasted, and we can know some details and nuances about the nature of this time period that we're in that will help us navigate some of the difficulties and also take advantage of some of the potential assets of this time. So in the Vedic system, they did a very good job of understanding, and when I say they, this is most of the information in that system is understood to have essentially been divined by the rishis, who are sort of the sages in deep states of meditation and observation of nature. So this wasn't really anyone's like good idea or anything. It was an understanding of how things work based on their observation of both their internal and external world. So you can think of it as sort of like spiritual technology that was extremely advanced thousands of years ago. So all of this information is coming from a time far, far away, but somehow they knew that we'd be in a state such as this. And we'll circle back to even more detailed understanding of now, and I'll talk hopefully today a little bit about some of the astrological transits that are conspiring to create some of what we're currently dealing with. But first, this is starting from the kind of most broad level possible, and we'll get more and more specific. So the understanding of time is fairly advanced and complex in this system, and they conceptualize very large chunks of time and have qualities associated with each of those chunks of time. And probably the most well-known are the yugas, which are the 4 ages of man, each comprising, in total comprising, and there are a lot of differences of opinion, but basically over 4 million years of time. And the four ages each have their own qualities, and the general idea is that there's a slow deterioration of human health, human lifespan, human morality through the course of those four ages. Starting, the first age is characterized by all of this sattva, or sort of goodness and peacefulness, and everyone is essentially in a state of meditation, and not really, there's not really like greed and avarice and poor states of health and things like that. So, but we do happen to be in the last fourth cycle called Kali Yuga, which is essentially characterized by really compromised morality. Evil people are in positions of power, and good people are imprisoned or otherwise silenced. Everything is sort of backwards in a way. And you have to have a certain level of suspicion of anyone who is in a position of telling you what to do, basically, because of the sheer level of corruption is nauseating, basically. And so there's this darkening that happens, and the lifespan decreases. So where once a human life, and we don't know, how much of this is fantastical and exaggerated and how much is accurate, but a human life was well over 100 years, had to be hundreds of years in the beginning cycles of time. And in Kali Yuga, which lasts, by the way, a little over 400,000 years, according to most sources, the lifespan is just getting shorter and shorter until basically the idea is that this period ends with like total annihilation of ourselves. But it started in around 3000 BCE. So we actually have a ways to go, but we are definitely seeing the signs and signals. And so I think it can be helpful when you see things happening around you and everything can feel kind of wrong. And that's because it is. That's because that is the nature of this time period, however difficult it is to ingest and digest that, which we'll be talking more about, the importance of that. This is just, in a way, a part of the natural cycle of increasing chaos and darkness that happens through the evolution of time from the Vedic perspective. So, and it's not all heavy and dark. There's the nature of that heaviness and darkness has a way of amplifying the bright spots that are there as well. So there is in this age considered to be a higher potential for spiritual evolution, kind of because of the compressive forces of all this darkness and lack of truth and confusion and chaos. It tends to actually push people towards God, so to speak, or towards understanding higher forces and influences. And at a certain point, when things, and you may have experienced this on a personal level, but when things get really hard, it's like everyone reaches towards God. Everyone wants to know why and starts kind of seeking in a more maybe internal direction, because the external world is not satisfying or it's not answering the questions. So there's a huge amount of potential for what they call moksha in the Vedic system, which is essentially spiritual liberation. So there is a way to cut through that darkness and the heaviness. It just requires a lot. It requires, a lot of focus and connection with your own heart, or what they call bhakti, kind of this devotional energy. So you have to stay clear about what you're aligning with and committing to. I think a really nice modern example would be, the influence of social media and how you can, if you're very liberal and sort of careless with your attention, it's very easy to actually just get completely sucked into alternate realities and other people's opinions and this whole world of digital media that's not necessarily reflecting reality. But if you're careful with your attention and make a decision to really digest everything that's coming in and decide your opinion on things, and then maybe limit your intake and take a more generative rather than receptive stance there, and just be kind of disciplined with that, then you can separate yourself from some of the influence of that. So there is a lot of possibility, but it does take care, especially at this time, with where you put your attention. We'll be talking more about that when I get to the Ayurvedic component of this. So I'd like to read a little excerpt from the Vishnu Purana, which has some descriptive words for Kali Yuga, which give you an idea of what to expect. The kings will be of churlish spirit, violent temper, and ever addicted to falsehood and wickedness. They will inflict death on women, children, and cows, which are considered very sacred and still are in India, sacred animals. They will seize the property of subjects, be of limited power, and will, for the most part, rapidly rise and fall. Their lives will be short, their desires insatiable, and they will display but little piety. The people of various countries intermingling with them will follow their example, and the barbarians, being powerful in the patronage of princes, whilst pure tribes are neglected, the people will perish. Wealth and piety will decrease day by day until the world shall be wholly depraved. Property alone will confer rank. Wealth will be the only source of devotion. Passion will be the sole bond of union between sexes. Falsehood will be the only means of success in litigation, and women will be the objects merely of sensual gratification. Earth will be venerated only for its mineral treasures. The Brahmanical thread will constitute a Brahmana, which means that wearing the clothes of a spiritual person makes you a spiritual person instead of actually being spiritual. The external types will be the only distinctions of the several orders of life. So basically, this superficial aspect takes on the most importance as opposed to the internal actual attitude and character. Dishonesty will be the universal means of subsistence. Weakness will be the cause of dependence. Menace and presumption will be the subterfuge for learning. Liberality will be devotion. Simple ablution will be purification. Mutual assent will be marriage, meaning there may be no love. Fine clothes will be dignity, and water afar off will be esteemed a holy spring. The people unable to bear the heavy burdens imposed upon them by their avaricious sovereigns will take refuge among the valleys and be glad to feed upon wild honey, herbs, roots, fruits, flowers, and leaves. Their only covering will be the bark of trees, and they will be exposed to cold, wind, sun, and rain. No man's life will exceed 23 years. Thus, in the Kali age, shall decay flourish until the human race approaches annihilation. So strong words there. Again, we're not at the very end of this long period, but you can see the signs of the decay all around. So I think having that context can be sobering again, and kind of help people recenter on what's important and sort of cut through all of the accept that there is untruth, that there is darkness and this weight and a lot of collective confusion. And I think in that acceptance, see more clearly what you want to focus on, what is important, kind of strengthen your resolve, like as if you're sort of going into battle. There is like a little war being fought, but it's mainly centering on morality. So if you want to feel good, and maybe even have a shot at physical health in this age, strengthening your personal connection with self and maybe something higher, and your own moral compass is probably the way to go here. And also not having an expectation that things are going to somehow, the expectation that things are going to resolve and be peaceful is probably not realistic in this time period. There is likely to be this kind of underlying strife as things fall apart. So finding the place where you can feel strong and centered and accept the turbulence that is in the world instead of having this tension of kind of trying to expect it to calm down. I think that's probably the most exhausting approach, to kind of wait for the pacification and the peace, because it's not likely to come and probably not in the way you want or to the degree you want. So instead, trying to understand how to accept what is and then do the best you can inside of that. And not to say not to fight for something better, but to kind of take the approach of the long haul in that battle for, light and brightness and truth. And truth itself is a very complicated subject in this time period because of the layer of darkness and confusion. It's not necessarily clear what is true or who's sometimes it's the person that appears actually very devilish because they're going against the established order that is actually carrying more moral weight. So there's a lot of this backwards thing in this age, and that's one of the trickier energies to deal with. So as we move into the Ayurveda, I think it will become a little bit more clear how you can help yourself in terms of clarity, maintaining your own clarity in all of this confusion. Okay, so inside that larger scope of time, we do also have some really significant astrological transits that kind of usher in another layer of this Kali Yuga energy. One of them was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn in 2020, which is obviously a very big year for everyone on Earth. And this ushered in a new cycle, a cycle that changes about every 200 years, depending on which elemental trine these two are conjoining in. And this tends to track with the rise and fall of civilizations and kind of major upheavals and overhauls of structures of power and all of that. So that's another piece of what we're seeing here, specifically in the last, 4 or 5 years, is the amplification of the Kali Yuga energy coming through this new burst of change that Jupiter and Saturn initiated. In the coming spring, there will be another strong set of transits to Pisces that's also going to create another level of potential, I will say, change for now. All of that I will address in a separate podcast because it's a fairly big subject. So with all of that, we're looking at time, the quality of time, which is the study of Vedic astrology. And there's a lot more to say on that, but that at least gives you a general lay of the land for at least how to maybe approach understanding why everything is so weird, basically. Okay, and so another level I would like to bring in is a concept in Ayurveda here called Ama. And for anyone who doesn't know what Ayurveda is, it's a science of health, essentially, associated with Vedic astrology and yoga and the whole collection of the Vedic sciences. And Ayurveda is very old and extensive science, coming primarily from India, and it comprised an entire healthcare system. It had a surgery branch, it had the pediatrics, and all these different areas addressing kind of every part of the human system. And it's still practiced in India today. There's a lot of Western medicine in India too, but Ayurveda is now traveling around the world and helping other people understand health from this pretty unique lens. And I won't get into any more detail than that right now, other than the concept of digestion and Agni, which is very central to Ayurveda's understanding of health. So this kind of forms the backbone of life. The term is Agni in Ayurveda to describe an individual's digestive capacity. And to give you a sense of the importance of Agni, Agni is also deified as a very central god in the Vedic system, whose job it is to ingest the offerings from the various rituals that are used for pacification of different energies and deities and planets and all of that. And Agni consumes those offerings. You'll see them being made into the fire, and is said to transport them to the various deities that then receive that nourishment. And the physical Agni in the human being is kind of a correlate for that. So you can think it's kind of a beautiful thing actually to think of the food you're consuming being transformed by this, by your physical Agni digestive capacity, and then as an offering to your own body to be turned into nourishment that can then be utilized by the body and forms you. So it's a very special, sacred process that takes place and honored very distinctly in this system. So I think the overarching idea of Agni is that it's the guard through which everything that you intake has to pass in order to turn into you. So similar to the Western idea of digestion, where something is taken in and sort of broken down and transformed into something else. That's the same idea with Agni, but in the Ayurvedic system, they don't just talk about food in this way as something that needs to be digested, but also consider anything that's coming in from your environment, any experience, any collective influence, any collective mood, your own moods and emotions, ideas, thoughts, all of that undergoes or needs to undergo its own digestion by Agni. So if your individual Agni or digestion is weak, not only can there be kind of like physical consequences for that, but there can be mental, emotional repercussions as well. Agni is required for the whole system to transform everything that is coming in into something usable. And there's a lot of individual variation in terms of digestive capacity and what works for your Agni and what doesn't. And that gives us a lot of answers to the questions about these various fad diets and why different diets are working for different people and not others. Ayurveda can explain all of that, and a lot of it is rooted in the different types of Agni and what they respond well to and what they don't. Okay, and so what happens when what you consume in the way of food or information or images, anything coming through any of the sense organs, when there is overconsumption and your digestive fire cannot keep up with that, then there is said to be the production of ama, which is basically like uncooked food or uncooked anything that's not really been properly processed in a way that can turn it into something you can actually use. That becomes ama, and it's sort of you can think about it as a type of like sludge almost in your system that can accumulate over time, especially if whatever you're intaking continues. You don't desist from that behavior, and so it just keeps building up and building up. And there are various signs and symptoms of ama in the system. Ama, by the way, is a contributor to essentially every disease process in Ayurveda. So this may start as sort of over-consuming in one instance and then making that a habit, and some discomfort maybe initially in the digestive tract, and then that can spread to other parts of the body and develop over time into full-blown disease. So this is a very important thing to address and be aware of. And my argument is that in this time period we're in, we just talked about Kali Yuga and the overarching kind of weight of this period, which is at a certain point psychological and emotional, it requires actually more digestive capacity, which I think many people can relate to at this point when you see how much the turmoil in the collective can weigh on you. And that the idea in Ayurveda is that actually all of that needs to be digested, the whole cultural confusion, and it can actually have a physical impact on your system. There can be health consequences to having so much um, negative stimulation coming in from the outer world. And then when you put the things that we're intaking from the various machines that we interact with on top of that, and then environmental pollutants and things like that, it's very easy for an individual's Agni to be taxed, overtaxed, and then for Ama to start to accumulate. And again, this can be on a physical level, but there's also this kind of mental Ama that can happen that is, well, and even physical, mental Ama is related to the physical Ama. And so this can show as things like depressive moods, brain fog, lethargy, difficulty getting up in the morning. All these heavier, slower states are some of the first signs of Ama, and of certainly feeling just on a physical level like you're not digesting your food properly, that not digesting the information and what's your experience properly. I think that will tend to turn more into psychological problems, whether depression or just, pervasive confusion, being in a fog that you don't necessarily can explain or understand. And these things can grow subtly over time. So suddenly you're in this pervasive heavy mood that you don't know where it started, but the root was, way back when some kind of overconsumption happened or exposure to negative images and some of the really easy to find cultural negativity. So this is a really important thing, I think, to talk about, and just to have the basic understanding of that. Probably because we're living in a heavier time period, we need to be a little bit more careful with what we are ingesting on the in terms of food, in terms of who we're surrounding ourselves by, in terms of the information we're taking in. If we're not going to also take the time to sit down and digest all of that thoroughly, which that's a kind of a different subject, because the digestion of information, especially considering what we're all intaking, is not an easy process. And it's very different from reposting what someone said, without actually taking it in and swirling it around and separating it. And so, that digestive process is a lot about separation and putting everything where it goes, and making sense of the different pieces, and then turning that into something that's actual sort of like wisdom versus information, or experience versus information. And that's something that I don't think we've necessarily been taught how to do thoroughly. And so a lot of the information coming in, my contention is that it turns into this kind of collective ama that is haunting and confusing the situation even more, because that is its own kind of weight and darkness in the human system that then makes it more difficult to have clarity about what's happening. So I think a new muscle that probably needs to be developed in this current climate, with all of the information saturation, is the type of Agni that's going to sort through information and really be with it, and go to the roots of it and separate it and understand where different information is coming from further down the line, like tracing it to a point that things can actually make sense and you feel like really rooted in that truth, which of course requires a lot of time, and many of us don't have that. But I think that that's part of the Agni required for this time period, is navigating the information environment. And that's even just before we even get to the food, because we can be eating the healthiest, organic, locally grown, completely compatible to your constitution food. But if you're watching the 24-hour news cycle while you eat that food, or your stomach hurts because you're so worried, about what's going on around you, then that there is very little nutrition to be derived from that food, and most likely it will actually create ama in your system. One of the precursors to ama, or one of the causative factors for ama, is strong emotions. So many of us are living with that, and not something in the Western mind, I don't think, that is commonly thought about, but it's like you have to digest your emotions along with your food. So if you're already in full-time, have a full-time job digesting your emotions, you're going to need to modify your food intake accordingly to simplify that and make it so that your system is not overburdened. And I think if many of us are able to engage in the process of actual digestion of the information that's coming in, something beautiful can happen. Something actually creative can happen, and there can be maybe some resolutions to some of the issues that we have. I think that the echo chamber situation and the regurgitation of information before it's been properly digested is actually kind of blocking us from, in many cases, getting to a solution. So that's just something we need to get past, as far as I can tell. And I do think it's possible. So, and one thing that can help, which is to actually just be aware of how to start to digest ama for each individual on an individual level. And a lot of that is going to have to do with, like I said, unburdening your system. So on the level of intake from all the senses, and many people, are already saying this, but limiting your intake to what you think you can actually digest. If you're waking up with nightmares or you're not sleeping because of the information you're taking in, then that's probably too much. And then dietarily also, if you are in times of emotional stress and uncertainty, certainly we all need to keep eating, but not overdoing it, or maybe leaning into lighter foods, especially depending on which season you're in. Like spring is already a heavy season we're coming into. So, I expect more sickness just because, and there does seem to be more sickness this winter season. And I think that part of that is the emotion and worry contributing to more ama in the system. And one thing that ama can do is just make you sick, even in acute sickness. So yeah, lightening up in some way, and kind of like taking stock of what you're taking in, and then seeing maybe where you can either spend more time digesting what's coming in or just reduce what you're consuming for the time being. I think those are some practical things you can work with. And as ama clears, individually and collectively, there's like a brightening that happens. Sometimes even your senses feel more clear, your mind should feel more clear, and you should feel lighter overall. And of course, Ayurveda has specific protocols tailored to each individual for digesting ama, called ama pachana, and that's usually what happens before even addressing bigger diagnoses, because there's almost always ama involved. So, and to wrap up the Ayurveda discussion, that one of the Ayurveda basically says that individuals' health is dependent on their environment. And that's generally taken to mean the qualities in the environment and how they are interacting with the qualities in the individual. There's a whole complex, sophisticated system of evaluating qualities and things. And this is, I think, one example of how that is definitely the case, and a great thing to be aware of, especially for the Western mind, which I think tends to come in with an idea of independence and being sort of impermeable to influence in a way, especially on such a deep level of entanglement on your physical health being subject to the influence of your cultural environment. That's not maybe as often talked about, but it's definitely a reality. So that's basically what I wanted to say to get us going on a deeper context for where we are now, both the concept of Kali Yuga and ama have to do with addressing the weight around us and the heaviness of the current moment. And there needs to be that honesty with the diagnosis, so to speak, of where we are now in order to move forward in any meaningful way. So it's not like altogether pleasant, but I think that it is relieving to let in reality as well. And many of these things will be very obvious to a lot of people who are living this right now. So I wanted to get this element of context in so that we can also move on to a little bit more detailed analysis of what's happening from some other angles, including the influence of place and sort of the voice of the earth in a way. And I will circle back to some of these transit discussions because that's going to be another element to bring in. So I hope this gave you some new information or a new way of seeing things that helps you make some sense of what is a little bit of a confusing time. And we'll just keep going deeper. So thanks for joining me.